It's just past midnight on Christmas Eve, 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. Inside the Sodder family's two-story home, the lights glimmer warmly against the cold winter night. George and Jennie Sodder and 9 of their 10 children sleep soundly, or so it seems. In a few short hours, their world will be engulfed in flames, and 5 of the children, Morris 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny 8, and Betty 5, will vanish without a trace. At 12:30 a.m., Jennie Sodder awakens to the sound of a ringing telephone cutting through the stillness. She hurries downstairs to answer.
Hello, who is this?
Unknown woman.
Can I speak to?
I'm sorry, you have the wrong number.
Frowning, Jenny hangs up. It's strange. A party line. An unfamiliar female voice. Laughter in the background, asking for someone Jenny doesn't know. She double-checks the house. The downstairs lights are still on, curtains open, and the front door is unlocked. Things the children normally took care of when they stayed up late. Jenny notices her 19-year-old daughter Marion asleep on the couch. The new toys for her younger sisters still scattered about. Assuming the other children have gone up to the attic to bed, she turns off the lights, locks the door, draws the curtains, and returns to her own room. About 1 a.m., Jenny is startled awake again, this time by a sharp thud on the roof, followed by a rolling sound, like a heavy object tumbling down. She holds her breath. Silence. Perhaps it was just a clump of snow or a prank tossed onto the roof, she thinks. When no other sound follows, Jenny drifts back to sleep. Approximately 30 minutes later, thick smoke invades Jenny's room. She bolts up, coughing, and races out to find flames devouring George's home office, the room that houses the fuse box and telephone line.
Fire, George, get up, the house is on fire.
George Sodder and his older sons, John 22 and George Jr. 16, awaken to Jenny's screams. They leap into action. The blaze is already spreading fast. George Sodder's eyes widen at the sight of flames licking up the stairway to the attic, where the children's bedrooms are. He and Jenny can't reach the upstairs. The staircase is an inferno. George hollers desperately for the children upstairs, but no voices answer. George.
Morris, Martha, Louis.
Jenny.
Jenny, Betty.
There is no response beyond the crackle of fire. George and Jenny rush to gather everyone they can. 3 of their eldest, Marion, John, and George Jr., and the baby Sylvia, age 3, manage to escape into the icy night, along with George and Jenny. But 5 children remain trapped inside, presumably still in the attic bedrooms. Outside, the family is in a frenzy. Marion.
They're still in there. Maurice, Martha, Louis, little Jenny and Betty, they're all inside.
George Sodder is grim and determined. He lunges for the ladder, perpetually kept propped against the side of the house, but it's gone from its usual spot. Nowhere to be found.
The ladder! Where's our ladder?
Unknown to them yet, that ladder has been discovered later, tossed down an embankment, 75 feet away from the house. Think George. The trucks. George owns 2 coal trucks used for his trucking business. He has an idea. Drive one truck up to the house, climb on top to reach the attic window. He dashes to his trucks, but neither will start. Both engines, which ran perfectly the day before, now cranked futilely and refused to roar to life.
Quick, we'll use the water barrel.
Outside the house sits a rainwater barrel, but it's winter. The water inside is frozen solid. No help there. Every plan the Sodders try is mysteriously thwarted. As flames consume the home, Marion runs to a neighbor's house to call the fire department, since their own phone isn't working. But the phone call can't get through. The operator does not respond. Another neighbor tries calling from a nearby tavern. That phone is broken. Precious minutes tick by in chaos and terror. Eventually, someone drives into town to find the fire chief, but due to a wartime shortage of manpower and an inexplicable series of delays, no firefighters arrive until sunrise. George, Jennie, and their 4 remaining children can do nothing but watch in horror as their home collapses into a heap of burning timbers. They stand barefoot in the snow, skin stinging from the cold and from heartbreak, screaming the names of the 5 children they cannot reach. For 45 agonizing minutes, the Sodder house is engulfed. By the time the volunteer fire brigade finally reaches the remote farm, hours later, there is nothing left but embers and ash. It looks like an unspeakable tragedy, 5 young lives seemingly lost in a Christmas inferno. But this nightmare is only the beginning. In the days and years to come, the fate of the Sodder children will grow into one of the most baffling mysteries of the 20th century, full of strange clues, lingering hopes, and dark theories. To understand how such a tragedy could breed so many questions, we must step back and meet the Sodder family before that fateful night. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddu in 1895 in Sardinia, Italy, came to America as a teenager in 1908. He built a life in West Virginia, working hard on the railroads and then starting his own trucking company, hauling coal. In 1922, he married Jennie Cipriani, a fellow Italian immigrant's daughter. Together, they settled near Fayetteville, West Virginia, and had a large, loving family of 10 children between 1923 and 1943. By the mid-1940s, the Sodders were, by all accounts, one of the most respected middle-class families around, as a local official said. But George was also a man of strong opinions, never shy to voice them. In particular, he was fiercely anti-fascist. Having left Italy, George publicly criticized Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, even after World War II ended. In an Italian immigrant community, where not everyone shared his views, his outspoken stance caused tension and anger. Some of his fellow immigrants, loyal to the old country and its former dictator, took offense. George's eldest sons would later recall heated arguments between their father and others in town over Mussolini. In October 1945, 2 months before the fire, an ominous incident occurred. A traveling life insurance salesman came to the Sodder house, attempting to sell George a policy. George declined. The salesman became enraged. In a flash of anger, he warned George with a terrifying prediction. Insurance salesman:
"Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini."
George was taken aback, a direct threat against his home and children, over his anti-Mussolini sentiments. Still, he didn't take it entirely seriously at the time. Fayetteville was a small town. People said crazy things in anger. He brushed it off as an idle rant. Not long after, another strange visitor appeared. A man came by the Sodder home, asking about possible work. While there, he wandered to the back of the house and pointed at 2 fuse boxes attached to the house.
"This
He gestured to the electrical boxes.
is going to cause a fire someday."
George was puzzled. He had just had the house rewired to install an electric stove, and the local power company had inspected and pronounced the wiring safe. Why would this man predict a fire from the fuse boxes? It felt like another eerie warning. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, 1945, the Sodder children themselves noticed something unusual. George's older sons reported seeing a strange car parked along the main highway through town. Watching the younger kids as they walked home from school, the occupants were intently observing the Sodder children. The family didn't know who it was, but the sight made the older boys uneasy. It seemed as if someone was keeping tabs on the Sodder family. These incidents, threats, warnings, and suspicious watchers would later take on grave significance. At the time, the Sodders went about their lives, unaware of the dark clouds gathering. Now, on Christmas Eve 1945, the mood in the Sodder house was joyous. Their second oldest son, Joe, 21, was away in the army, but the rest of the family was home for the holidays. Marion, the eldest daughter, had been working in town and brought home surprise gifts for her younger siblings. Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jennie 8, and Betty 5 were overjoyed with new toys and pleaded to stay up past their bedtime to play. Jennie, doting mother that she was, agreed, as long as Morris and Louis, the two oldest boys still up, remembered to finish their chores of feeding the cows and chickens before bed. George and his two eldest sons, John and George Jr., who had worked with him that day, were already asleep by 10 p.m. in their rooms. Jennie took baby Sylvia, just 3 years old, to bed with her around that time. The stage was set, a happy family on Christmas Eve, a home filled with laughter and contentment. Yet, unknown to the Sodders, someone may have been plotting. The frightening warnings George had received were about to manifest in the most horrifying way. Everything seemed ordinary when the Sodders went to sleep that night. But mere hours later, the fire struck, and 5 of the Sodder children never emerged. The Sodders' nightmare had begun. Christmas morning, 1945. The Sodder home is now a smoking ruin, a skeletal shell of timber and ash. Fire Chief F.J. Morris and his crew finally arrive, but far too late. It's around 8 a.m. by the time the small volunteer fire brigade, hampered by manpower shortages and a failure in communication, reaches the scene. It later came out that the department had no siren or proper phone tree. A neighbor had to track down the fire chief, who then had to find firefighters one by one. George and Jennie Sodder stand in anguish, expecting the worst. 5 of their children's remains somewhere in those ashes, but as the firefighters and family search the basement as smoldering embers, they find nothing. No skulls, no bones, no bodies, nothing to indicate 5 young children had died there. Fire Chief Morris:
We didn't find any remains at all.
It sounds impossible. In a typical house fire, one would expect to find bones or identifiable remains of the victims. Chief Morris himself seems surprised. He suggests perhaps the blaze had burned so hot and so thoroughly that it cremated the children completely, nothing left to find. He points out the fire raged for nearly an hour. Could it have incinerated all evidence of 5 bodies? Maurice concludes grimly that the children must have died in the fire, their remains essentially vaporized, on December 30th, 1945, just 5 days after the tragedy. Death certificates are issued for Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty Sodder, citing cause of death as fire or suffocation. The authorities seem eager to close the case quickly, ruling it a horrific accident caused by faulty wiring in the Sodder home's electrical system. But George and Jennie's grief is mixed with confusion. Faulty wiring. George can't accept that. He had the house's wiring inspected earlier that fall when installing an electric stove, and it was declared safe. Moreover, if an electrical problem caused the fire, why were the house lights still on in the early stages of the blaze, as Jennie recalled? If the wiring had shorted out, the power should have failed, yet Jennie saw lights burning downstairs right before the fire spread. The Sodders are asked to leave the wreckage untouched for a proper investigation by the State Fire Marshal's office. Imagine the agony. The family, homeless and shattered, are told to leave the ash that might contain their children's remains as is. For days, they wait, hoping authorities will conduct a thorough search. But as hours stretch on, no one comes. Whether due to the holiday or other priorities, an official in-depth investigation fails to materialize promptly. After 4 days, George Sodder can bear it no more. He cannot stand the sight of the ruin that was their home, the thought of his children's bodies somewhere beneath the rubble. In an act of despair, and perhaps unknowingly destroying evidence, George bulldozes the site on his own. He covers the basement ruins with 5 feet of dirt, intending to create a burial memorial for his lost children. Jennie later plants flowers across that raw earth, a small garden shrine to her missing 5. On that spot, the Sodders place handmade memorials, angels and blossoms for each child. Officially, Fayetteville moves on. A coroner's inquest with startling speed had already convened and declared the fire accidental, blaming faulty wiring. But George and Jennie's disbelief only grows as they reflect on the night's events. There are too many strange details that don't add up. No human remains at all in the ashes, not a single bone fragment from 5 people. If the fire had been hot enough to obliterate bones, why were everyday household items, like appliances, recognizably intact in the debris? Jennie notes that fragments of the kitchen stove were still identifiable in the charred basement. Lights were on during the fire, suggesting the cause wasn't an electrical short. The telephone line was dead during the fire. Later, they would learn it wasn't burned by the fire at all, but cut by someone at the pole. The ladder, which was always kept by the house, had vanished, only to be found later, down a hillside away from the property. Both of George's trucks, vital in any rescue attempt, mysteriously failed to start that night, despite functioning fine on December 24th. And that thud on the roof Jennie heard, followed by a rolling sound. What was that? Grief-stricken as they are, George and Jennie begin to wonder, could the fire have been set on purpose? Could it have been a diversion to cover up something even more unthinkable, the abduction of their children? Jennie?
I just don't understand how 5 children could perish and leave no trace. Not a bone, not a bit of flesh.
Trying to make sense of the no-bones mystery, Jennie Sodder conducts her own experiment. She burns animal bones, chicken bones, pork bones, beef joints, in her wood stove and backyard. Each time, she's left with a pile of charred bone fragments. No matter what, the bones do not fully disintegrate. This is consistent with what any crematorium will tell her. Even at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours, human bones remain in recognizable skeletal fragments. Yet her house burned at a lower heat and for less than an hour. Why was nothing found? Jennie knows in her heart that 5 children don't just vanish into ashes. One of the surviving sons, John Sodder, adds to the confusion with a detail about that night. In his first police interview, John said he climbed into the attic amid the flames to try to alert his siblings. Later, however, he changed his story, admitting he had only called up the attic staircase and had not actually seen any of the children up there due to the flames. This inconsistency troubles George and Jennie. Did John actually make contact with his siblings or not? Did the children even remain in that attic as the fire intensified? The uncertainty gnaws at them. Over the days following the fire, whispers and gossip begin circulating in Fayetteville. A tragedy like this, 5 children gone, it's on everyone's lips. But locals are divided. Some accept the official story, a tragic electrical fire. Others murmur that something more sinister happened. Even a local minister comes forward to tell the Sodders about a troubling rumor, that Chief Morris had perhaps found some kind of remains after all, but kept it secret. There is so much unanswered. George and Jennie Sodder decide they won't rest until they find the truth. Their 5 children deserve nothing less. If the authorities aren't going to dig deeper, then the Sodders will do it themselves. The morning after the fire, they had stood before a heap of ashes and been told to accept that their children were gone, but they cannot accept it, not without proof. And so, amid unspeakable grief, their journey to unravel the mystery begins. The Sodders' quest for answers will span decades, leading them down every possible path, from small-town rumors to the corridors of federal investigators, all in the hope that somewhere, somehow, they will find out what truly happened to Morris, Martha, Louie, Jennie, and Betty on that terrible Christmas Eve. In the weeks after the fire, the Sodders begin collecting clues that reinforce their suspicions of foul play. The evidence, once they start looking closely, is startling. The telephone line. Initially, it was assumed the fire had knocked out the Sodders' phone, but a telephone repairman informs them the line hadn't burned. It had been deliberately cut from the top of the pole, about 14 feet off the ground, not at the point of fire damage. This could not have been an accident of the flames. Someone climbed up and snipped the wire in the middle of the night. In fact, a neighbor reports seeing a man on the property the night of the fire. He was stealing a block and tackle from George's garage, equipment used for removing car engines. This same man, when found, admits to cutting the phone line thinking it was a power line and stealing the hardware. His name is Lonnie Johnson, a local. He pleads guilty to the theft and line cutting, but denies having anything to do with the fire itself. Was Lonnie acting alone opportunistically, or was he part of a larger plan to disable the Sodders' communication and equipment that night? The timing is suspicious. The very night of the fire, he ensured the family could not call for help. The missing ladder, George's ladder, typically kept propped against the side of the house for easy access to the roof, had vanished on the night of the fire. Days later, it is discovered hurled down an embankment, about 75 feet 22 meters from the house. Someone had purposely moved it from its usual spot. This wasn't a coincidence. It appears to have been strategically removed so that George could not use it during the emergency. The malfunctioning trucks, George's 2 work trucks, which had been in perfect working order on December 24th, mysteriously refused to start when he desperately tried to use them during the fire. After the fire, George suspects sabotage. The neighbor's account of the thief supports this. The block and tackle that Lonnie stole was used for engine repair, removal. Could he have tampered with the engines? We know he was on the property that night. It's not a stretch to imagine he might have crippled the trucks as part of a coordinated plan to trap the family. It's another strike against the likelihood of all these failures happening by mere chance. The object on the roof. One afternoon in the spring, young Sylvia Sodder, who often plays in the yard near the memorial garden, finds something peculiar in the grass. It's a small, hard rubber object, vaguely pineapple-shaped. Jenny recalls the loud thump on the roof and the rolling sound the night of the fire. George examines the object and concludes it looks like a military incendiary device, the type commonly known as a pineapple bomb used in warfare, a crude napalm grenade. Suddenly, that noise Jenny heard at 1 a.m. makes sense. Someone likely tossed this onto the roof, and it ignited the fire when it rolled off, and perhaps hit the ground or gutter, spraying flames onto the house. The implication is chilling. The blaze was not an electrical accident at all, but an act of arson using an incendiary explosive. With each clue, the Sodders' conviction grows. The fire was deliberately set as a distraction or cover. But then, what happened to the children? If the 5 missing kids didn't die in the fire, where did they go? Astonishingly, witness reports begin to surface. People who claim they saw the Sodder children after the fire. A woman driving by the Sodder house while it was burning said she saw some of the children peering out of a passing car, as if they were being taken away from the scene. This is said by a bystander on the road during the fire itself. At a tourist rest stop, about 50 miles west of Fayetteville, the morning after the fire, a waitress says she served breakfast to 5 children, accompanied by 2 strange men and 2 women. She recalls that the group drove a car with Florida license plates. The children matched the descriptions of the Sodder kids, and the woman even specifically remembers serving them breakfast on Christmas morning, unaware at the time of the tragedy that had just unfolded. She later sees photos of the missing children and is adamant she served those kids. There was a car with Florida plates, she insists to police. About a week later, at a hotel in Charleston, WV some 50 miles from Fayetteville, a woman named Ida Crutchfield, who ran the hotel, spots photos of the missing Sodder children in a newspaper. She comes forward with a stunning story. Roughly 1 week after the fire, late at night, 4 of the children, she is less sure about the 5th, stayed at her hotel room with 4 adults, 2 men and 2 women of Italian descent. In a signed statement, the hotel owner describes how she tried to be friendly with the children, but the adults were hostile. The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction, she reported. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but one of the men glared at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party clammed up, stopped talking to me. I sensed I was being frozen out, so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning. This account, if true, strongly suggests an organized effort to take the children out of town. The credibility of these sightings varies. Local police later questioned the woman from the phone call, the one with the weird laugh, and concluded it was likely just a wrong number, coincidence. As for the rest stop and hotel sightings, investigators initially expressed doubt. Ida Crutchfield, for instance, only saw photos of the children 2 years after the fire, then came forward 5 years after the event, which to them made her memory suspect. Yet the consistency of multiple independent witnesses, seeing children resembling the Sodders in the company of adults, especially Italian-looking adults, far from Fayetteville right after the fire, is hard for the Sodders to ignore. For George and Jennie, these stories are a lifeline. They imagine their children, alive, taken on some journey, against their will. They cling to the hope that maybe, just maybe, their 5 children escaped the fire alive, only to be abducted by unknown individuals. The question then becomes who would do such a thing, and why? The Sodders turn their growing list of clues over to the authorities, begging for a deeper investigation. What if our children were kidnapped, they ask. What if the fire was set to cover it up? But the local police and fire departments seem reluctant to pursue these leads aggressively. Perhaps they're embarrassed that they failed to find the children, or to respond in time. Perhaps they truly believe the Sodders are in denial, unable to accept the tragedy. Frustrated and increasingly convinced of a conspiracy of silence, George and Jennie realize they need more help. They will have to push beyond Fayetteville to get answers. The pieces of the puzzle are on the table. Threats and warnings before Christmas. Odd occurrences, the night of the fire. Sabotaged rescue equipment, and eyewitness claims of the children seen alive afterward. George and Jennie Sodder are now certain. Their house was burned down on purpose, and their 5 children were taken. The authorities may have closed the case, but for the Sodders, it's only getting started. The Sodders vow to find the truth. If the local police won't investigate further, they will find someone who will. The mystery of their missing children demands to be solved, no matter where it leads or how long it takes. 1947. 2 years have passed, and there are still no solid answers. George and Jennie Sodder turn to the nation's top investigative agency for help. They write a desperate plea to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to the attention of Director J. Edgar Hoover himself, laying out their case that their children were likely kidnapped under the cover of the 1945 fire. Amazingly, Hoover replies. A letter from the FBI director arrives, saying, "Although I would like to be of service." The matter related appears to be of local character, and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. Hoover expresses his personal desire to help, but notes that he cannot just barge in uninvited. He offers, if the local authorities give permission, he will send agents to assist. But Fayetteville's police and fire departments swiftly decline the FBI's involvement. Officially, they consider the case closed. They don't want the federal government stepping in over a small-town fire. So the Sodders take matters into their own hands. They hire a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley from a nearby town. If the police won't investigate, Tinsley will, and he soon uncovers some disturbing information. Remember that life insurance salesman who threatened George, saying his house would go up in smoke because of his anti-Mussolini statements? Tinsley finds out that this very man served on the coroner's jury that investigated the fire. In other words, a man who effectively told George his home would be burned. Down was later part of the group that officially declared the fire an accident. At best, that's a gross conflict of interest. At worst, it suggests malicious intent or a cover-up. Tinsley also learns the man had once worked for George and was oddly a co-signer on George's insurance policy, which he had increased in value shortly before the fire without the Sodders' knowledge. The implications of this are unsettling. Could he have stood to gain from the insurance payout? Was this personal revenge? Or was he connected to others with a motive? Tinsley then hears a curious rumor about Fire Chief F.J. Morris. A local minister confides to Tinsley, and separately to George, that Chief Morris privately admitted something. He claimed he'd found a body part in the ashes, specifically a human heart, and that he hid it in a metal box and buried it at the scene. Maurice had supposedly said he didn't want to upset the family, or perhaps he thought finding remains would give the Sodders closure. This startling revelation prompts George and Tinsley to confront Chief Morris directly. Facing the Sodders' determined gaze, Chief Morris eventually acknowledges the story and agrees to show them where he buried this box. Together, they dig it up from the rubble. Inside the box is indeed a piece of flesh. They take it to a local funeral director for examination. The verdict: it's not human heart tissue at all. It's a fresh beef liver that was never exposed to the fire. In other words, at some point after the fire, someone placed a raw liver in a box and buried it at the site. Why? Soon, rumors circulate that Morris himself planted the liver, hoping that when it was found, the Sodders would be satisfied that some remains of their children had been discovered and would stop their inquiries. Caught in this apparent deception, Chief Morris is deeply ashamed. Whether he acted out of misplaced compassion or as part of a darker scheme is unclear, but the damage is done. The Sodders now have zero trust in the local authorities. They can't shake the feeling that certain people in Fayetteville know more than they're admitting. By 1949, with still no resolution, George Sodder manages to interest a pathologist from Washington, D.C., Dr. Oscar B. Hunter, in the case. George convinces Dr. Hunter to lead a new excavation of the fire site, a more scientific, careful dig through the soil. In August 1949, they break ground. This time, they sift through every inch. They unearth artifacts, like damaged coins, and a partly burned dictionary that belonged to the kids, and then human bones. They discover several small bone fragments, for vertebrae from a human spine. Could this be the evidence they've been seeking? The bones are sent to the Smithsonian Institution for expert analysis. The Smithsonian's report comes back with interesting conclusions. The lumbar vertebrae all belong to a single person, and that person was likely 16 or 17 years old at death based on bone development. The oldest missing Sodder child, Morris, was 14. And one might argue an early maturing 14-year-old boy could have bones resembling a 16-year-old's, but it's unlikely. None of the other missing children were older than 14. Moreover, the bones show no evidence of exposure to fire. They are uncharred. The Smithsonian scientists say it's very strange that these are the only bones found. In a fire of such short duration, one would expect to find full skeletons of all 5 children, not only a few vertebrae. Their conclusion: these bones likely did not come from the Sodder children at all. Instead, they may have already been present in the dirt that George bulldozed into the basement to fill it in. Sure enough, Tinsley later tracks the filled dirt's source to a local cemetery, and it seems probable the dirt was taken from a spot that included human remains. An unrelated grave's fragments inadvertently moved. A heartbreaking dead end. The bones only deepen the mystery rather than solve it. The Smithsonian returns the bones to the Sodders in 1949. They have since been lost. By this time, the Sodder case has gained national attention. West Virginia's state government takes notice. In 1950, the West Virginia legislature holds 2 hearings on the matter. George and Jennie testify, presenting all their evidence of suspicious circumstances. However, West Virginia Governor Oki L. Pattison and the state police superintendent, after reviewing the case, deliver a painful message. They tell the Sodders the search is hopeless, and officially close the case at the state level. To them, it seems the Sodders' grief might be driving them to see what they want to see. They suggest there's nothing more to be done. In their eyes, the simplest explanation is that the children died in the fire, and everything else is either coincidence or the family's inability to accept that loss. The FBI, which had said it could step in if kidnapping were indicated, actually does get involved briefly, considering the possibility of an interstate kidnapping. FBI agents follow a few leads in the early 1950s, but after 2 years of investigation, they hit the same wall of inconclusive evidence and ultimately drop the case. The trail is cold, and no government agency is willing to continue. George and Jennie Sodder, however, refuse to give up. The officials might quit on the case, but the parents won't. They turn their hope and energy to the public. If law enforcement won't solve it, maybe someone out there knows something. In 1952, the Sodders take a dramatic step that will etch the mystery into local legend. They erect a giant billboard along State Route 16 near the site of the fire. On it are portraits of the 5 missing children, along with their names, ages, and a blunt question: what was their fate? The billboard lays out the basics of the case and offers a $5,000 reward, eventually doubled to $10,000, for information leading to the recovery of any of the children. In bold letters, it essentially accuses kidnapped 5 Sodder children and lists various questions and suspicious details, imploring the public for answers. The billboard, with its stark black and white photographs of Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, becomes a landmark. Drivers along Route 16 for the next 37 years will remember that haunting sign. It's a constant reminder that for the Sodder family, the case is anything but closed. The billboard and the Sodders' persistence attract nationwide media coverage. Tips pour in from all over. Some are hoaxes, others sincere, but ultimately fruitless. Among the notable leads and theories that emerge over the years, the Sicilian Mafia theory, given that the Sodders were of Italian origin and George was vocal against Mussolini. One prevalent theory is that the Italian Mafia, perhaps a local branch with old world connections, targeted George. It's speculated that George may have refused to join or donate to a mafia group, or refused extortion demands. The fire and kidnapping could have been retaliation or leverage. Indeed, the threat from the salesman explicitly referenced George's anti-Mussolini remarks. Some family members later theorized the mafia tried to recruit George and he declined. Then they tried to extort money and he refused. Taking the children could have been punishment or a way to coerce him. Perhaps the children were taken back to Italy to put them beyond reach. This theory also aligns with the involvement of 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction in the hotel sighting. It's conjecture, but it's one of the more elaborate ideas the family has considered. An inside warning, child abduction plot. Another theory suggests that someone who knew the family, perhaps even a friend or neighbor, warned the children to leave the house because it was going to be set on fire, under the pretense of rescuing them, only to then spirit them away for other purposes. The unlocked front door Jenny found, the curtains open and lights on after midnight. Could that indicate someone came into the house quietly after the parents were asleep? Perhaps a person the kids wouldn't fear. It's a chilling thought. The children could have been lured out of the house while their parents slept, right before the fire was started. This might explain why none of the 5 upstairs kids cried out or attempted escape as the fire spread. Maybe they were never there to begin with. Human trafficking, illegal adoption. Some have speculated the children might have been taken and sold to adoptive parents or into some kind of child trafficking ring. It's a less talked about theory publicly, but within the family and among some investigators, the idea lurked that someone saw the large, attractive Sodder family and plotted to abduct some of the kids for profit or other nefarious reasons. Support for this is largely circumstantial. The presence of strangers watching the Sodder children walk home from school in the weeks prior suggests premeditation. Perhaps buyers were lined up, and the fire was the diversion to cover the crime. George and Jenny can't help but question if some local authorities were corrupt or complicit. The behavior of Chief Morris, planting fake evidence, is deeply troubling. John Sodder, the oldest son, would later say the fire marshal was either paid off or they didn't push it. In his view, someone in power intentionally dropped the ball. The fact that a man who threatened George sat on the coroner's jury is another red flag. It leads the Sodders to wonder, did someone in the town government or police help cover the tracks of this crime? Or were they simply embarrassed by their own failures and wanted the Sodders to stop digging? In an interview decades later, John reflected, "Our thinking was that the kidnappers might have been trying to take us all. My brother and I barely got out of the house. But you can't relive it. The idea that the culprits intended to wipe out the entire family except maybe the parents is terrifying. And if John's right, only a stroke of luck or grace allowed him and George Jr. to escape when they did." Another rumor that reached the Sodders was that relatives in Florida, or perhaps distant family in Italy, were sheltering the children. One tip claimed the children were with an uncle of Jennie's in Florida. George actually investigated such a lead, going so far as to force a relative in Florida to prove the kids he had were his own, not George's missing children. Nothing came of it, except strained family relations. Another time, a woman from St. Louis wrote to say she thought Martha was in a convent there. George traveled there too, only to find it a dead end. Each far-fetched lead underlined how far the Sodders were willing to go, anywhere, for a glimmer of hope. These theories swirl around the family's quest. None can be proven, but none can be entirely dismissed either. The Sodders remain open to any scenario that could return their children to them, or at least tell them their fate. As the 1950s progress, the Sodders persist. They answer letters, follow leads, and keep the case in the public eye. George travels the country repeatedly, chasing every rumor. A bar patron in Texas claims to have overheard some suspicious conversation about a fire in West Virginia. George goes to Texas. A woman in Phoenix writes that a young man she knows is asking about his real identity and might be one of the Sodder boys. George considers going there too. Each time he returns home empty-handed. Through it all, George and Jennie refuse to give up hope. They truly embody the idea that a parent's love will stop at nothing. And while they search, they also continue raising their remaining children, trying to provide some normalcy under the shadow of uncertainty. The case, now widely known, captures the public imagination. Newspapers run features on the mystery of the 5 missing Sodder children. It's often called the case of the children who went up in smoke, an eerie moniker, considering no evidence of them was found in the ashes. People trade theories in magazines, and later, in books and radio shows. Did the Sodder children die in the fire, or were they kidnapped? It becomes one of West Virginia's most infamous unsolved cases. As the 1960s approach, the Sodders have lived with this mystery for over a decade. They maintain the memorial billboard, update it as needed, and increase the reward money, hoping to entice someone with knowledge to come forward. But the big breakthrough they long for remains elusive, until one day, more than 20 years after the fire, a new clue arrives in the mail and reignites their hope once more. It's now 1967, 22 years since the fire. George Sodder is in his 70s, Jennie in her 60s. They've kept the story alive all this time. One afternoon, Jennie goes to the mailbox and finds an envelope addressed only to her. It's postmarked Central City, Kentucky, with no return address. Inside, Jennie's hands tremble as she pulls out a photograph. It's a portrait of a young man, about 30 years old. He has dark, curly hair and dark brown eyes. His nose is straight and strong. One eyebrow has a distinctive upward tilt. Jennie's heart pounds. These features are hauntingly familiar. She calls George over, and together they stare at the face in the photo.
It looks like Louis.
Louis Sodder was 9 in 1945. He would be in his early 30s in 1967. The man in this photo could be him. The resemblance to their lost little boy, now grown, is uncanny. On the back of the photo, scrawled in hand-printed letters, is a cryptic message. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill lil boys. A 90132 or 35. The Sodders are stunned. Who is Frankie? Louis didn't have a brother named Frankie. Perhaps a nickname. Ill lil boys. Could it be Lil Boys? Nonsense. And the sequence a 90132 or 35. A code. Coordinates. They aren't sure. but the name Louis Sodder is clear as day. Someone, presumably Louis himself, or someone who knows him, is telling them Louis is alive. Over 2 decades of heartbreak, Jennie Sodder has refused to move on. She still wears black mourning clothes every day since 1945, a symbol of her grief. Now she clutches this photograph like a holy grail. Could at least one of her children have survived? Could this really be her Louis? George and Jennie decide to keep this development quiet. At first, it feels fragile, precious. They immediately hire another private detective to go to Central City, Kentucky, find the sender, track down the man in the photo. They dare not share the details publicly for fear that if their son is in danger, alerting the world might make his captors harm him. Unfortunately, this new PI vanishes without a trace. He never reports back to the Sodders. They cannot locate him. It's as if he disappeared into thin air. It's another bizarre twist. Did something happen to him, or did he simply defraud an aging couple desperate for closure? The Sodders will never know. This setback is devastating. Yet, the photograph itself is undeniable evidence to them that at least Louis might be out there. The Sodders add the new photo of Louis to their billboard, updating it with an image of how he might look grown up. They omit the details of the postmark or any identifying information about Kentucky, fearing for Louis' safety. They also hang an enlarged copy of the photo over their mantle at home, a constant beacon of hope and sorrow. In 1968, George Sodder gives an interview to the Associated Press. His voice is tired but determined. He says, "It's hard sometimes to get to sleep at night, just wondering about them. After all, if someone wanted to get me, why did they get my family, too?" He admits feeling like he's hitting a rock wall. "We can't go any further. We just don't know what to do now." There is anguish in those words. Over 2 decades of searching and still at an impasse. George laments that time is running out, but he makes it clear, we only want to know. If they did die in the fire, we want to be convinced. Otherwise, we want to know what happened to them. It's a simple plea for truth from a father who has carried the weight of not knowing far too long. Tragically, George Sodder passes away in 1969 at age 73, with the mystery unresolved. He had spent the remainder of his life tirelessly seeking his children. His funeral is marked by the profound absence of 5 of his 10 children, a void that was never filled. After George's death, Jennie Sodder, ever resilient, keeps on with the mission. She erects a fence around her property and even adds additional rooms onto her house, almost as if building walls around herself for solace. For the rest of her life, she continues wearing black in perpetual mourning. Every day, she tends the flower garden at the site of the former house, lovingly caring for the blooms that symbolize her missing children. The gigantic billboard on Route 16 stays up, weathering year after year of sun, wind, and snow, its fading photographs silently challenging the world. What happened to our children? The 1970s and 1980s roll on. George and Jennie's surviving children, now adults, with families of their own, join in keeping the search alive. They give interviews, maintain the billboard, and ponder the theories themselves. John, who was 23 at the time of the fire, and initially tried to rescue his siblings, rarely speaks of that night except to say the family should try to move on. Sylvia, the baby who was in the house, grows up to become one of the most vocal keepers of the flame. As she reaches adulthood, she assists her mother and older siblings in every way possible to investigate leads. The Sodder siblings and grandchildren come up with theories of their own over the years, piecing together family lore and any new information they can obtain. One favored theory is indeed the mafia kidnapping angle. The local mafia had tried to recruit Dad, and he declined. They tried to extort money and he refused. The family speculates. Perhaps an insider who knew the plan told the children to go out of the house during the commotion, promising them safety, only to deliver them into the hands of those mafia kidnappers. If true, maybe the children were taken away and raised by others. And, a heartbreaking possibility, perhaps those children once grown, never reached out to their mother because they feared it would bring harm to her or themselves. Some Sodder relatives thought if the kids knew George and Jennie survived, they might have stayed away deliberately to protect their parents from retribution. It's a sad thought that maybe, somewhere, at least one or two of the Sodder children lived into adulthood, always looking over their shoulder, wanting to contact their mother, but afraid of what might happen if they did. For Jennie Sodder, none of these theories bring true peace. She lives the rest of her life with the unanswered questions. In 1989, at the age of 85, Jennie Sodder dies. Only after she is gone do her surviving children finally take down the old billboard. The letters faded and paint peeling that had pleaded for information all those years. It had stood by the highway for nearly 4 decades, a testament to their parents' unwavering search. Even in Jennie's obituary, the names of her 5 missing children are listed, not as deceased, but as missing since December 24, 1945. The Sodder siblings, now fully grown, and many with children of their own, vow to continue the legacy of the search. Sylvia Sodder, the little toddler who was carried out of the fire, grows up with her parents' relentless determination instilled in her. I experienced their grief for a long time, she recalls of her childhood. Indeed, Sylvia said her earliest memory was that terrible night in 1945, and the absence of her siblings shaped her life. She promised her parents she wouldn't let the story die. For decades, Sylvia and the Sodder grandchildren keep the story alive in articles, on the internet, and at family gatherings. Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the last surviving Sodder sibling, lived into the 21st century. She passed away in 2021 at age 79, still firmly believing that her brothers and sisters did not die in that fire. To her last days, she hoped for answers about what really happened that Christmas Eve long ago. Today, the Sodder children's disappearance remains one of the most haunting cold cases in American history. It stands as a story of unimaginable loss, but also of unimaginable perseverance. The Sodder family's refusal to give up, their willingness to challenge official conclusions and keep searching, is both heartbreaking and inspiring. The case highlights the limitations of law enforcement. How back in 1945 the investigation was cursory, perhaps bungled or even compromised. It underscores the power of public opinion and persistence. How a determined family rallied national attention and kept a mystery alive when others wanted it forgotten. Over the years, many have speculated about the Sodder children's fate. Did they perish in the flames, victims of a tragic accident? Some still think so, noting that no concrete evidence of their survival ever emerged. Or were they kidnapped, victims of a sinister plot? Many others believe the evidence of foul play is overwhelming, from threats to sabotage to alleged sightings, and that the children were indeed taken that night, possibly by the mafia or other criminals, perhaps even with a nod from someone local in authority. The truth, frustratingly, has never been definitively proven either way. In the end, we are left with tantalizing fragments of a puzzle, a mysterious phone call, a missing ladder, an intruder cutting phone lines, reports of strangers in getaway cars, a planted liver, a photo of a man who might be a lost child grown up, and a family's undying love. The Sodder case continues to fascinate and intrigue people to this day. It's a story that asks, how far would you go to find the truth? For the Sodders, the answer was, as far as it takes, for as long as it takes. As we end this tale, picture that lonely billboard on Route 16, standing vigil for almost 40 years, emblazoned with the photographs of 5 smiling children and the words, "What was their fate?" It's a question that has never been answered. The Sodder family never got their closure, and 5 children who would be in their 80s or 90s today have never reappeared. Were Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty Sodder truly taken by fire? Or did they vanish into the night, alive, yet lost to their family? Until evidence emerges, a DNA match, a deathbed confession, or some long-buried secret brought to light. The disappearance of the Sodder children will remain an enduring enigma. It is a tragic story of a family consumed by grief and hope, of a mystery that outlived the ones who desperately sought to solve it. December 24th, 1945, a night of flames and mystery. Decades later, the question still lingers in the Appalachian air. What happened to the Sodder children? The mountains keep their secrets, and the Sodder case remains an unsolved legend. A true story, with an ending forever unwritten. The embers of the Christmas Eve 1945 blaze have long since cooled, but the mystery of the Sodder children remains as haunting as ever. 5 children seemingly vanished that night without a trace, leaving behind more than just ashes, only unanswered questions that echo through the decades. It's a story of unimaginable loss and undying hope, a tale that has become legend even as it remains painfully unresolved. For the rest of their days, George and Jennie Sodder refused to believe that their 5 missing children had truly perished in the fire. The couple never rebuilt their home. Instead, they turned the site into a memorial garden and continued to search for any shred of evidence. A weathered billboard along Route 16, lined with the children's photographs and a plea for information, stood for decades as a testament to the family's undying hope. Yet, despite years of investigation and countless leads, the Sodders never found the closure they so desperately sought. Even the physical evidence defied explanation. The ladder that should have been beside the house was gone from its usual spot, and the home's phone line was later found to have been cut by someone rather than destroyed by the fire. Add to this a bizarre late-night phone call and whispers of a sinister plot behind the scenes, and the tale grows only more unsettling. With each new theory and supposed sighting, the puzzle becomes more baffling. Nearly 8 decades later, the fate of the 5 Sodder children remains an enigma, a haunting question that refuses to fade away. Now, as we close this chapter of the Sodder story, that enduring question passes to you. What do you believe really happened on that fateful Christmas Eve? We encourage you to share your own theories, thoughts, and insights in the comments below. Join the conversation and help keep the search for truth alive. Because sometimes the only way to shed light on an enduring mystery is to keep its flame burning in our collective imagination.